This is Robert Russell, the director of Cartoonists Rights Network International. Um, I'm sitting here in Burke, Virginia, in our offices. I'm talking with Jonathan Geyer, who is sitting in. You're in Europe now, aren't you?
I'm in Istanbul,
In
so
Istanbul.
half Europe, half Asia.
Jonathan is living in Egypt. And stop me when I start to go wrong on this, Jonathan, a Fulbright scholar, living and working right now in Egypt. He is the author and head honcho for a new website celebrating Egyptian political cartoons. Um, it's really appropriate that you're doing this at this time to kind of mop up or to kind of bring to the world's attention the phenomenal burst of creativity and excitement that the Arab Spring created, especially in Egypt. Uh, I think the rest of the world is waiting for something like this. But I'd like to start by asking you a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you wound up in Egypt. Um, you must speak Egyptian fluently. Is that correct?
Well, pretty good. I've studied Arabic for 5 years, but as my professor says, the first 10 years are the hardest. So I'm just sort of getting my foot through the door in terms of translating, and I do all my interviews with cartoonists in Arabic. So basically, I'm doing a larger project in how cartoons have shifted since the Arab Spring in Egypt. I've interviewed about a dozen cartoonists. I have a huge archive of about 100 books and thousands of clippings from newspapers, sort of chronicling the last year. And my first question was, what's changed? Has censorship changed? What are the biggest differences right now? And what I've discovered is that they don't just date to January 25th, 2011, when the uprising began against Hosni Mubarak, who was deposed in February of that year. They started before that, starting in 2005, 2006, 2007, when it was supposedly a dictatorship. Cartoonists were doing pretty radical stuff. So this is one of my first findings, and I've been blogging about this. But I'm a cartoonist myself, bro. So I connect to this on a kind of visceral, personal level, where when I say with the cartoonist, I get to show off my cartoons to him as well, and get his input, and it makes for a different kind of back and forth than doing this purely as a journalist, where you're trying to get a scoop out of a cartoonist. It's more like we're sharing tricks of the trade and talking about how we each see the art form developing
Yeah.
online and in other platforms. So it's been a real pleasure, and I thank Fulbright gratuitously and endlessly for this opportunity, because I have the best job in the world. I wake up in the morning and I read comics and I blog about them, and then I read the day's papers in Egyptian Arabic, and that's what I've been doing
Well,
for about 6 months.
I certainly hope your mother doesn't find out. Jonathan, get a job. This is not a job. Let me ask a few questions. I read something you wrote a couple of weeks ago, and you and I exchanged emails on this. I call it the boss tweet effect. Um, you had made some comments that looked to me like it was actually people in the ministries or in the government. I'm getting a Skype call. I got it from Do you know Zunar? That basically said, please stop these nasty cartoons. We can't stand them. The cartoons, we don't care what people say. We don't care what people write. It's them damn cartoons.
Exactly.
What went on? Who said this? And how overtly or public was this kind of statement?
Um, so when the military was controlling Egypt in 2011 to 2012, cartoonists were not shy in depicting the sort of human rights abuses and misuse of power that a lot of Egyptians were experiencing. But at least two or three cartoonists I've spoken to told me that they received personal calls from military officers, or their editors had, saying basically tone down your work. You can write about it in an article, but obviously the power of the image goes beyond.
That's
Now,
that's marvelous. You can write anything you want, but
yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. Um, but what's particularly interesting is now that the military is back in power in Egypt, and there's a huge celebration of them as sort of liberators of the country, how cartoonists are reacting. And basically, there's been a whole wide spectrum of cartoons that are very pro anti or vitriolically against the military. So I guess one of the big takeaways is that there's a lot of free expression in Egypt.
Going on right now.
For those of us sitting in America, we think any country that is Arab or Islamic in its orientation is not a free place, but there is such a vibrant press culture, and when I go to the newsstand around my corner, I see cartoons on the front page, cartoons above the fold. Basically everywhere I look in Egypt are rambunctious cartoons.
Why do you think this is? Why do you think Egyptians are so hungry for this kind of visual imagery?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, well, Egypt is really the center of Arabic film and songs and theater and literature. So it has a rich cultural history to draw from. So cartoonists basically have this toolbox of old movies, old songs, all these moments under the last 3 presidents. Everyone recognizes Nasser, Sadat, and Mubarak. These were like household names in a way that, Kennedy would be. So they have this whole toolbox that they just kind of reorder and, cut and paste in an old song, and it's really effective.
The Three Stooges.
Exactly.
I've always been very troubled and frustrated with the problem of translation. Some of our Romance languages lend themselves to translation very easily. Going across Arabic to English or French, when you're also dealing with an entirely new script and probably a historical literary tradition that may be quite different. How are you solving this problem? Because I know you're addressing it in your website.
Well, one of the cool things about Egyptian cartoons in particular is they're almost all written in slang. So it's different than what I studied in college, sort of formal modern standard Arabic. This is like dirty stuff, street language, slurs of all sorts of racist, sexist persuasions. But it makes for a lot of fun. It means I have to, always run my translations by friends to make sure I didn't miss the boat. Or it means, studying these old songs and movies and parts of Egyptian culture that people are drawing upon to make these jokes. But the bigger question is whether you do a literary translation or you sort of capture the essence or the meaning of a cartoon. So if it's a cultural reference, for instance, we're going to the beach and you name a specific beach outside of Cairo, I might not use that name of the beach because it will throw off an outside reader and just say, we're going away for the weekend on holiday, or something that puts you there. If there's a movie reference or something, you might want to make a footnote, of course. But for that actual literary meaning, it needs that kind of punch that only American slang, not a literary translation will, literal translation will do.
What do Egyptian cartoonists need or want from the rest of the world? I mean, when they cast their pens about to Egyptian politics and their own world, how do they look at the rest of the world, and what do they need from the rest of the world?
That's a challenging question, bro. I'll give you 2 different perspectives. One is Doa El-Adel, who's this great feminist, visionary cartoonist who really draws powerful stuff about, stuff like women's circumcision of women, which no one's drawing about. And for her, sort of having this global solidarity of websites that publish her work, and when she was sued by an Islamist lawyer, sort of a whole network of people calling out for her, I think that's very useful. But on the other hand, sometimes as Western or outside of Egypt readers, we fall into a trap of sort of wanting to help and wanting to give money. And I think sometimes the better answer is letting Egyptian political cartoonists be artists. They don't want to necessarily be seen as revolutionaries or have labels like pro or anti or, belonging to a party or a camp. It's better to sort of look at their work as art and as something, obviously with a very political and important undertow, but something that needs to be appreciated in of itself, not as just something that's a sort of exhibit.
What kind of impact did the cartoonists have on the events of the Arab Spring movement in Egypt? I mean, right from the first days of the barricades up until now, how important were those cartoonists to what happened and what continues to happen?
I would argue that the cartoonists were part and parcel of the Tahrir Square revolution of 2011. Not that they were the cause or the effect of it, but that every stage of the way, they were drawing some of their harshest, most impactful work in December, a month before the uprising. That certainly didn't cause the revolution, but it captured this public mood that nothing else, no one else was paying attention to, but the cartoonists knew that something was in the works. Now, when cartoonists in January 2011 came to Tahrir Square to join the protest against Mubarak, a lot of them saw their cartoons on placards and started to see their cartoons being used as graffiti. And graffiti has been this major outpouring since the revolution. I mean, the streets were basically clear of it when I studied in Egypt in 2011, and now you can't turn a corner without some incredibly audacious street art, on government buildings. So cartoonists sort of have been narrating the revolution, obviously every day with their deadlines, and there's a ton of cartoons in Egyptian papers, sometimes 5 in a single day, in a single paper. But on the other hand, they're sort of a part of it because they'll walk down the street and see one of their cartoons sort of graffitied onto a wall. They didn't do that. I mean, they're basically part of the story that I'm trying to tell.
I have a feeling of how wonderful this is, seeing my work. I wish I'd been paid. What is the economic base for cartooning there? Is there a healthier atmosphere there than there is in the United States? I mean, which is, what's happening to cartooning in the U.S.
Sure. Oh, I mean, the same questions of print and online and freelance and salary sort of are prevalent in Egypt, but with two major differences. The first is there are tons of Egyptian cartoonists on payroll at newspapers. Like, some newspapers have a stable of 14 cartoonists. Not that they're all published every day, but so there's a pretty large pool for a country that most of its newspapers are based in Cairo. So it's interesting that Cairo has this density of cartoonists. On the other hand, there's a culture of state media and a semi-official and official newspapers. And with that comes syndicates and the journalist syndicate. And there's not a cartoonist syndicate per se, but they're in the different, whether it be art or journalist syndicates. And there's a whole political economy of that I'm trying to get to the bottom of, but it's all very complicated and bureaucratic.
Is there a national or recognized cartoonist association or professional group for cartoonists?
There's a caricature club where I sometimes hang out at on Sunday afternoons, but this is really the old guard, sort of the I don't know, dusty professorial kind of cartoonists. Not this sort of incredible place in terms of a gathering of all of these octogenarian cartoonists who relay history and are in fact mentoring a younger generation of cartoonists. But I'd say outside of the official club is where the more exciting stuff is happening.
Is there a need or a use to have a national association, and would cartoonists of different political persuasions or religious persuasions find it convenient to sit down at a table with each other?
I quite like that idea. And I often think it would be fun to bring together all these cartoonists.
We Americans love this kind of stuff. De Tocqueville said that that's our strongest suit, is organizing into groups.
I would say, though, that some of the coolest stuff that's happening in the world of art and cartooning in particular in Egypt is happening sort of organically. A new comic magazine called Tuk Tuk, those little cars that roll down the street, Tuk Tuk. It's a quarterly comic journal that's the best. It's like the best alt comics you've ever seen, being published by, 10 guys in their 20s and 30s. But I don't think this could have happened under Mubarak when publishing and self-publishing was harder. But they're not part of a formal organization, and they've had a spin-off magazine that's a comic. It's essentially the New York Review of Books for comics in the Middle East, which is basically heaven, called Art 9. And there's another spin-off comic magazines and graphic novels. So there's just basically, I would argue, a new golden age of caricature in Egypt. It's just exploding.
That's wonderful. Are many of your cartoonist friends, or are you part of the cartoon movement?
I guess a couple of them. I would have to say that there's so much happening in Egypt right now. I mean, it's dizzying to keep track of the news, and every day is a major event, that a lot of the Egyptian cartoonists are very focused on being journalists for the story that they're covering, which is a revolution, uprising, coup, ouster, whatever you want to call it. If you're filing about it every day, they're sort of more focused on that than international audiences at the moment.
Are cartoonists, do they express any degree of confidence that Egypt is going to save itself from the path it seems to be on right now, which is kind of self-destructive?
Um, well, I would say that a lot of the cartoonists are quite visionary, and even if they're not optimistic, the cartoonists in Egypt, like in the U.S. or Europe or elsewhere, can sort of see beyond the horizon a bit, and are really in this moment right now. It's very hard to be optimistic when you have basically massacres in the news and political tension higher than any time that I've lived there over the past year and a half, and a lot of uncertainty, economic and otherwise. But what cartoonists are doing, and it's something that Victor Novaski writes in his new book about caricature, is that they're really serving as ombudsmen or as the social conscious. So when there's something that you can't really smile about, these guys are finding a way to smile about it. So, for example, after one of these massacres, my good friend Andil, who draws for one of the major papers, he's a brilliant caricaturist, he drew this happy Egyptian family carrying a flag, and they were covered in blood. And it just said, souvenir of the great Egyptian family, or something along these lines. It's hard to paraphrase. But he was capturing something that most people were, it was too hot to handle, and he did it with a kind of quick postcard jab. It wasn't an intricate grotesque. So I'm impressed every day that Andil and his colleagues at the Al Masri Al Yom newspaper are just doing their best work I've seen, and every day it's getting more powerful and disturbing and really necessary.
I can really understand why you say you've got the best job in the world. You're right in the center of the universe right now, and all kinds of stuff are just evolving around you. It sounds like one of the most creative times in Egypt's history.
Right. I mean, there's just art everywhere you look. There's this new downtown contemporary arts festival. Its second annual festival was last month. I mean, 30 days of theater, music, art, openings, closings in old cabarets and hotels and converted theaters from the 20s. So you have this on the one hand, you have graffiti, you have people starting art galleries in their houses. My friends have started the Nilings twice a month in their spare room, and they're absolutely brilliant. And then you have a new music sort of, I hate to say revolution, but I'll say it, sort of new electronic hip-hop, basically the new punk rock of Cairo. So, cartoons are just a sliver of this really cool avant-garde that's happening right now.
That's wonderful. I certainly hope you'll send me a link to the website, the website. We'd like to put it up on our website.
Great. Thanks so much, Brett.
Friends can visit. Say hi to my very good friends over there, Doha and Ali Salim.
Sure.
We know so many cartoonists in Egypt. We've been following their adventures, and I think it'll be easier for us if we have a place to go where we can find translations. Are you doing just into English or also into French or anything else?
So right now I've been translating a cartoon every day or so from the Egyptian press, although sometimes I sneak in a Palestinian or Turkish or something else. Unfortunately, I don't speak French, but we'll see. The site is just launched 2 months ago, so it was good timing. So I've got plenty of room to grow.
How much longer are you going to be in Egypt, and what's going to happen to the website when when the Fulbright people pull the plug?
So my grant runs through December, and the plan is I'm writing a book on this bigger project about the Egyptian cartoon and how the last decade has really defined a new art form, and how it's grown out of the 50s and 60s and this rich history. I mean, the first cartoon was published in Egypt in the 1880s. So this is not a sort of imported art. This is a very local art. So it's really exciting. So I don't know. We're working on a bigger story. So stay tuned.
Isn't the word cartouche basically a cartoon?
I guess so.
I think maybe that's where the tradition comes from. The whole thing was cartoons on a wall in a pyramid somewhere. Jonathan, it's wonderful speaking with you and getting to know you. We can talk a little bit off the record. Thank you very much for this interview. I think we're going to do this again soon.
Great,
And
pleasure.
as soon as we get this up on our website, I want as many of our clients to see it as possible. I think what you're doing is wonderful and very important.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
And you as well. I think the Cartoonist Rights Network is up to some amazing, important work as well.